What's up, guys? Got a beautiful day here in Utah. Got some news out of Utah, but first some news out of Georgia. And I have a concern about these type of cases becoming more prevalent and obviously talked about more because of the benefit of social media and seemingly nothing being done about it. That's what's frustrating to me about this stuff. So we got this case out of Georgia starting off, a small town called Mineral Bluff. Now, this is in the middle of, it's actually not in the middle, it's north of Atlanta, but in the middle of the country. The town of Mineral Bluff has a population of a couple hundred people. So most people, when they think of Georgia, they think of Atlanta. My family is from Georgia, but the entirety of the state outside of Atlanta is just a rural population of country folk living out in the middle of the woods. So you got a situation where this lady named Brittany Patterson is taking her eldest or oldest son to the doctor's office. While she's at the doctor, she gets a call from a sheriff deputy from this county, and this sheriff's deputy says, "Do you know where your son's at?" She says, "Yeah, I know where he's at. He's at home." She goes, "He's not at home." "Okay, where's he at?" "He's at a store less than a mile away, a General Dollar." And so you got a situation where a Karen contacted the police. And look, there's a lot of debate going on about whether or not this was okay. So if you are reporting on a child that you see walking down the road and that child's not in danger and the child is seemingly of reasonable age, which this boy was 10, about to be 11, then mind your own business. Okay, so we got a Karen who reports to the police. You got a child walking into a General Dollar store, going to the store. The parent gets called, this Brittany gets called and says, "Hey, do you know where your child's at?" And she says, "Yeah, I know where he's at." She says, "No, you don't know where he's at because he's at the store." And so I feel like, one, they get off on the wrong foot because you get a call from a concerned citizen, which obviously kickstarts this thing. You get a deputy sheriff thinking they're doing the right thing, but then they're questioning the parent, and the parent likely, just as I would, and maybe like you would be like, "So what's the problem?" Like, okay, my boy or my son is at the store. And this boy at the time of this, which is just a couple months ago, or actually a month ago in October, was 10. Now he's 11. He was a couple of days from turning 11. So we as a nation are concerned about the sexual identity of a child as they say it, and then facilitating that, and then the government and the infrastructure providing the facilitation of that via whatever the insane means are that I don't even get into because I'll get suppressed on YouTube. And you can see how aggravated I am by this vein in my neck. So then all is well. All should have been well. Because reasonable police officers, and I know a lot of reasonable police officers would have said, all right, like, that boy's obviously not in danger. Maybe give him a ride home and we'll be done with it. No, that doesn't happen. Obviously, it doesn't happen. So a couple hours go by, and the deputy sheriff shows up on the front doorstep, and here's what happens.
What am I under arrest for?
For reckless endangerment.
And how was I recklessly endangering my child?
We're not talking about it.
On October 30th, Patterson said she took one of her children to the doctor. In the meantime, her son, Soren, who since turned 11, decided to walk less than a mile into town from their home in rural Mineral Bluff, Georgia. While out, Patterson got a call from the sheriff's department, worried that Soren was walking alone.
I wasn't concerned. I wasn't, panicking or concerned because it's just a short walk from our house. He knows how to get home. He knows how to get there.
Authorities dropped Soren off at home, and 5 hours later, they returned.
Call mommy and tell them they're taking you to jail because you decided to walk down the street.
Let go of your hands. That's not his fault.
Yeah, call Army.
You're the mother. That's your responsibility.
Last time I checked, it wasn't illegal for a kid to walk to the store. So.
It is when they're 10 years old.
Patterson was booked on suspicion of reckless conduct, a charge that could carry 1 year in jail. The warrant claiming she willingly and knowingly did endanger the bodily safety of her juvenile son.
Our criminal justice system is built on the fact that you did something or you were negligent. You did something criminally negligent. So what is it she did?
Authorities have offered to drop the charge if Patterson signs a safety plan that includes the use of a GPS tracker on her son's phone. But she refuses to sign it or admit doing anything wrong.
I just felt like I couldn't sign that, and that in doing so would be agreeing that there was something unsafe about my home or something unsafe about my parental decisions, and I just don't believe that.
All right, so you have this situation where these police officers show up, these deputy sheriffs show up on the front doorstep, and they already know what they're going to do. So the supposed charge that they arrest Brittany on is basically child endangerment, because she was allowing her child to walk to the store without her consent, and she didn't know exactly where her child was. And that's child endangerment. And you could hear the sarcasm or the smart assery of the deputy sheriff as she's talking to this lady. And then she's even telling her, as she's saying it out loud to her kids, hey, you need to let somebody know because they're arresting mommy, whatever. And then the lady's like, it's not their fault. It's like, what? Like, if somebody said that in front of me and my child or me and my family, like, who the hell do you think you are? And that's the issue here. We have a situation in this country where somehow the government thinks we get to co-parent together. Like, just because you wear a badge, just because you represent an institution in my backyard, oh, by the way, that my wallet pays for, that somehow you get say in how I raise my children, somehow you get say in what I get to say or even do with my kids when no crime is committed. That's the aggravation that we're dealing with, which is the activation and weaponization of, whether it's lawfare, the weaponization of our justice system, or rogue officers not understanding their role, responsibility, and their damn job. You have one job: to enforce crime. So is there a reasonable suspicion of a crime being committed when you have a 10-year-old who, that boy looks like he's 13, 14 years old? I'm sure based on him being raised in Mineral Bluff, Georgia, he's had a good upbringing, but you don't see cops rolling up kids in Chicago, taking them to their parents and putting their parents in handcuffs when they're roaming the streets at 2 a.m. You don't see that. I mean, I live in Utah, where you go down to Provo, Utah, not necessarily up here, but in Provo, where it's more like a town and it's suburbia, you'll see, I've seen kids as young as 6, 7 years old roaming the streets by themselves. But we live in a safe community. I trust thy neighbor. And so I don't think it's a big deal. And I don't think other people in Utah think it's a big deal. So you don't see them being like Karens, like this lady who called the cops on this young boy and his mom. And so that is the issue that I think frustrates a lot of Americans. And there's part of the comments section that say on these videos or these news reports that, oh, well, if that boy was hurt or that boy was in trouble, you'd have a very different circumstance or situation. Okay, so what's the point? What's your point? Like, it is not against the law for your 10-year-old to go to the store down the road by themselves. That's not a statute, an ordinance, or against the law. But they called it child endangerment. And you know what they did? They actually dropped the criminal charge. And they did something really fishy, which is what happened exactly in my case. You know what they did? They contacted DCFS, the equivalent of Department of Child Family Services across the nation. It has different names. Child Protective Services, CPS, DCFS. They contacted them. And you know what they wanted to do? They wanted to put a safety plan in place. A safety plan. Okay, again, co-parenting with government institutions because they think they have a say, with qualified immunity, with their abilities to weaponize lawfare. They do whatever they want with no recourse. No recourse. You think any of these deputies are going to be fired? No, they're not, because they dropped the criminal charge even after putting her in handcuffs and booking her in jail. So they get out and then they negotiate a plea. Same thing they did with me. You know what they said? They said in her situation, if you sign this piece of paper agreeing to this safety plan, which by the way is civil, it's not criminal, it's civil. If you sign this safety plan, what we will do is we won't go after you and we'll drop the charge. But you're acknowledging guilt. It's called a finding. You're acknowledging guilt. And on the same token, we're saying that you are acknowledging that you were neglectful, that you basically didn't know where your child was, and the only way you were going to get through it as a safety plan, because this is the plan that makes your child safe, is you have to download this app that I'm sure the taxpayers paid for, that they're pushing to justify its existence. You got to download this app, and we got to be able, you have to be able to track your child, and I'm sure on the other end, they'll be able to track your child. So out of all the crimes, the crackheads, the meth heads, the fentanyl drug dealers, the gangbangers, all the actual crime going on in rural Georgia, this is the criminal they went after. A mom who's literally taking care of her boy by taking him to a doctor's appointment, and then the younger brother decides on his own accord, because he's probably a responsible young man, to go down to the general store. He wasn't in an alleyway smoking crack. It wasn't 2 a.m. And so they wanted to track him. And she said, absolutely not. I'm not signing anything. And this safety plan, 1, says that I'm guilty if I sign it. And 2, by what it is called a safety plan, you're telling me that you want to make my child more safe. This isn't making my child safe. My child's already safe. And that's what every single parent should say. In my case, they did the same thing. They took our child away from us, from our custody, 20 days after the initial charge. 20 days after the initial charge. You know why they did that? Because they screwed up. And they were trying to make a case for themselves. I saw the text from the victim advocate that was saying, your life's in danger. Saying that to my spouse, your life's in danger. So all that, and they justify taking our child, our 1-year-old, who was at the time 10 months old, and then going after my 5-year-olds, holding that over my head because they had to make a finding. In fact, the initial finding they made was child neglect against me. You know why? Because they said, if I thought it was a difficult situation, if I thought that my son was in potential harm's way, I should have took my son out of the home. Oh, so let me back up a little bit. So what you're saying is, okay, your justification for trying to take your son out of your spouse's hand was you thought he was in a bad situation. But because you didn't take him out of the home, that's child neglect, which is a civil finding. And my lawyer, and obviously through me, said, well, state of Utah, that's pretty hard to do because he was in jail. How is he supposed to take his son out of the home when he's in jail? And the reason he actually is in jail is because of the things he said in the affidavit of trying to take his son and remove him from a difficult situation. Okay. Oh, well, it doesn't matter to us. Because they literally said that. It doesn't matter to us. It doesn't matter. He should have figured out a way. He was in jail. He was in jail. So they said, well, why didn't he do it after? Well, why didn't I do it after? Because I had a protective order against me. Because in the state of Utah, like many states, especially with a domestic violence situation, not a conviction, just a charge, you are guilty, especially as a man. I'm going to put it out there. As a man, you're guilty. And so the protective order that's put against you, you can't have any firearms, you can't even have a bullet, and you can't be in your own home, which is why I lived in an Airbnb for 60 days. I couldn't be near my home, near my kids, and I was removed from it. And Well, that wasn't an excuse why I couldn't take my child out of the situation. And they still made a negligent finding, according to DCFS. And then when the criminal case was completely dismissed, they didn't dismiss my DCFS side. They didn't say, okay, this is what happened. Just like in Brittany's case, where the criminal side of it was completely dismissed. And then they said, we're going to hand it over to the civil side, to DCFS. You know why? Because they're committed. They're fully committed. And they're not willing to reel it back because of their own liability. I found this out the hard way. They have lawyers that litigate, look at civil rights violations, and they have immunity. And so what happens is, because they got the ball rolling and you're in the system, it's hard to reverse that. So they just don't reverse it. So we have a 12-year-old young man in northern Utah who died from malnourishment, as reported by 6 different people over years, saying that this was going on, this abuse was going on, and they did nothing. In fact, they did nothing up until the point that he was deceased. He passed away of malnourishment, and then they knee-jerked. We are still dealing with that, still dealing with DCFS, because they refuse to pull the plug and go, look, we might have made a mistake. We might have jumped the gun. And that's how it works, criminally and civilly. If you have kids involved in any circumstance, this is how it's going to work. You're the criminal. You're the bad person. So real criminals, people that are really abusing and neglecting their children, they're not dealt with. They're not dealt with like this. Because when you have real people who are really abusing their children, then they slip through the cracks. But all of a sudden, if you're coming up on their radar, they want to make an example of you, just like with Brittany, they're making an example of her. So she's not going to get out of this. She didn't sign it. And you know what they could do? They could take her boys away from her. They can go in that house and take their boys away from her. I had a judge, after a Friday, asking of us signing a safety plan on Friday. They said, Friday, you need to sign a safety plan. Except we texted and said, hey, do you want us to sign the paperwork and send it via email? Or do you want to do an online signing thing? What do you want us to do? They didn't answer. So we got it to them Sunday afternoon. They sent us the paperwork on Thursday. We had one business day. On Monday morning, they had my signed signature inside their email box. And they said on Monday morning, they didn't get the signatures yet. So their justification was they refused to sign the safety plan. Me and my spouse refused to sign the safety plan, and a warrant was signed by a judge that morning, and my son was removed from the home the next day, or that same day. That same exact day, my son was removed from the home. And their justification, you refuse to sign the safety plan. We have the email times 3 different segments of proof because it was CC'd to our lawyers, and you're saying we don't have it? It's here. We don't care. And then they used my child as leverage against my spouse and me so they can get what they wanted. Except they didn't get what they wanted because there was no admonishing of anything, any wrongdoing. So then taking a step back, 5 or 6 days later, we get Leland back. But here's the catch. They still owned him. They said the state has custody. And if you don't cooperate, we at any time could step in and remove him from the home. There was a lady from DCFS who told my mom and looked her in the face and said, we could take him away from you right now. And my stepdad said, I got 18 years. I got 18. I could do this all day long. I could do this for 18 years. And she was like, excuse me? He's like, hey, I'm telling you right now, like as long as it takes, whatever it takes, we're going to fight for our grandkids. They threatened us. They threatened my mom, and they physically removed my son from my house for nothing, for absolutely nothing. And you know what I could do about it? Nothing. There's nothing that could be done because of the statutes, because of the immunity they have. There's nothing that can be done. There's something that could be done with the police department. I won't even get into that, but there's nothing that could be done with the courts or DCFS. My lawyer said to me direct, verbatim, this is a situation where you could either lose your hand or lose your arm. That's the situation you're in. So you could fight and lose your arm, or you could just give in and lose your hand. That's the analogy my lawyer, who's a small town lawyer here in Provo, Utah, told me and dealing and battling with DCFS and the criminal system for decades. Wow. That's the circumstance we're dealing in. And I'm ranting, but it's making me angry because we had another situation in I believe it's Clearfield, Utah, where a situation, a man who happens to be disabled, he's actually a Special Olympic athlete, goes to a karaoke bar. And after the karaoke bar, he meets with friends. He decides to walk home like a responsible adult does if they've drinking. I don't even know if he was drinking. So he begins to walk across a parking lot, and a police officer, you know what? Let's just roll the tape. Let me show you.
I just told you, yes, you did.
I was just walking across the street. That's not doing anything.
Without a designated crosswalk, which you are legally obligated to do.
No, other people do it. They don't get in trouble.
I'm not talking about other people, I'm talking about you right now.
That's not
Maybe Charlie 27 to 78, we're going to be out at Pepperidge Apartments. Pepperidge Apartments.
Right now, I can have you fired. Go away. I haven't done nothing.
Yes, you did.
You guys always do this to me when I've done nothing. That's harassment.
40's fine. No?
That is harassment.
You committed a crime.
Or I'll be fired.
You committed a crime. I have a legal right to identify you. So either you are going to give me your ID, or I am going to put you in handcuffs, and then I'm going to find your identification anyway. So what is it going to be?
Crime. I haven't done any crime.
No?
No.
Okay, put your hands behind your back then.
I'm telling you.
Put your hands behind your back.
I'm telling you, I haven't done nothing. I haven't done nothing.
Give me your hands.
Help.
All right, there you have it. So we have a situation where a law enforcement officer is maybe trying to do the right thing, but what is he doing? And then what is the overextending circumstance that leads him to believe that I need to get into a physical altercation with a man who has disabilities? He said, I didn't know the guy was disabled. Like, isn't that your job? Aren't you supposed to be trained in that? So you get a man originally as a probable cause for jaywalking, which, by the way, the Utah statute says you can't use that to, segue yourself into probable cause for something else. So he uses that to ask for his ID, and he refuses to give his ID. So what happens? He gets rolled up. He gets physically rolled up and arrested. Now, everything since then has been withdrawn, and according to the chief, they're doing retraining. But this is the situation that we're living in. We're living in a circumstance, and I don't know what it is, because I know a lot of police officers that are super squared away, like rock stars, guys from San Bernardino, from Turlock, Modesto, my buddy Estevan and his whole crew, a whole bunch of squared away police officers. There are good police officers that work for me in Colorado, the Mats, so on and so forth, surrounded by a whole bunch of good officers. But it's like after or during COVID, maybe they did a hiring, they did a hiring freeze, and they needed to scrape the bottom of the barrel to get guys. But seemingly, there's a whole bunch of this overreach happening across the country. Now, on one hand, part of me is like, officers need qualified immunity. They need the ability to be able to do their job without the risk or the fear of being ostracized. But that's happening across the country anyway. But what happens when you have incompetent people? I don't even think it's just incompetent law enforcement officers. I think it's just the standard is so low that these people are just ultra incompetent. Like the female officer, the female deputy who's arresting Brittany, for her to be a smart ass and talking to you walk up on the house, seemingly a decent house. You talk to Brittany. She's not crazy. She's not on drugs. She doesn't seem like a bad mom. You look at her son, healthy, squared away young man. Okay, so what is making you reasonably believe that these are bad people? And that's the problem in our country right now. We have bad people in all over the bad institutions going after innocent civilians, responsible citizens who are law-abiding, who haven't committed a crime. At the same time, you have criminals that are getting rolled up and getting instantly released and their cases dropped or not even being dealt with at all. I'm watching videos across the country of gangbangers being confronted, teenagers that are in the middle of fights and assaulting police officers, and they're just being released. But we actually have situations and circumstances in America where we have Britneys and Special Olympic athletes being rolled up for absolutely nothing. Now, the inclination is to think that there's chaos and calamity throughout the country. I'll take a step back and go, that's not happening. It's very rare for this to happen. But the fact that it's happening and there's no consequence is the problem. And I don't know the solution. But there needs to be something. Because right now, a lot of these officers who are involved in these situations, and I've seen them violating people's civil rights. I watched this YouTube channel, I think it's civil rights attorney or civil rights lawyer. Man, when you watch that stuff out of West Virginia and the things that these police officers are doing, abruptly, overtly violating constitutional rights of American citizens with no consequence. It's the same feeling that a lot of Americans have when they see politicians getting away with essentially murder. You could lose 13 Americans in a botched pull-out operation that is completely because of incompetence, and nobody even loses their job. There's no consequence. You can get the former president of the United States almost assassinated, and there's no consequence. You're allowed to retire or just step down. That's the problem with everything that we're talking about. There's no consequence. And it boils my blood because I'm living that current situation. I'm living it right now. Give me the feedback in the comments down below. Let me know how you really feel. I'm going to go on to a underground patreon.com/Mike Glover and tell you, I mean, I'm doing a good job of telling you how I really feel, but I'm going to get into the nitty gritty a little bit on the underground. Also, if you haven't downloaded the Fieldcraft Survival app, 2 big things coming. Fieldcraft Survival app is available wherever apps are found. You got a whole slew of preparedness content. I'm also doing a series with Greg Lappin and Rob Parsons on personal defense and home defense. That will be on the app soon. And I'm adding a workshop next week, which is the preparedness workshop that I teach all over the country. I'm actually adding that to the website. So you could download the link and get that off the website on fieldcraftsurvival.com. Appreciate you guys. I'm off to the underground. Later.